The 402nd Army Field Support Brigade will be leaving Kuwait sometime next fiscal year to be repositioned with a new mission in Hawaii. The 8-year-old command, which started in Iraq and then moved to Kuwait, will support the Pacific Command as part of U.S. global priorities in the region. The 402nd is one of 7 Army Field Support Brigades under the U.S. Army Sustainment Command, headquartered at Rock Island Arsenal, Illinois. It is here where historian George Eaton discusses the 402nd on its inception, mission, and future.
There's a distinction in the Army between units that are not supposed to deploy and units that are supposed to deploy. All of our units were considered non-deploying units. So this change in '06 made them deployable units, and then we had to make them more formal, which the Army had to assign a number to them, as opposed to just a narrative name like we had before. And so this was a big part of what was going on with Army Sustainment Command, was making sure that we had these deployable brigades that could go to wherever a conflict was, wherever the theater needed them, and they had the assets to do that. The real focus was, at that first time, was maintenance and adding armor onto vehicles. And the threat changed, the war changed, and we were putting armor on everything. And that was a huge part of what they were doing first. There was all regular maintenance, higher level maintenance that was needed and management of that, but that real push was putting armor and protecting the soldiers that were in Iraq. And that took most of our time from '06, I'd say, up to 2008, for about 2 years, was armoring things. So our battalions under the 402nd were these guys that were managing the retrograde process, managing the maintenance process, managing property accountability processes, and then all those other things that were spread out across the country. Any place that you had an American force in Iraq, one of the 402nd's people was there. Certainly, situation reports, which had been every single day, almost as soon as it went back to Kuwait, dropped down to only 2 a week. So there's an indication that now things have slowed down. We're managing a flow now as opposed to fighting a war. But I think the biggest thing that people don't get, I hope that someday we really get this point across, is when the Army raised its hand and said, "We're out of Iraq." We weren't. The combat soldiers were out of Iraq, but the 402nd was still there, flying back and forth in the country, finding all the stuff that hadn't been turned in, cleaning out the bases, and doing that with much less security than they used to have. And luckily, right then, that time period, things were relatively quiet there. To me, that's a huge accomplishment that they did very quietly in the background with no fanfare. Is that we were doing this work still in Iraq. 402nd, they had to have a home station for it. The home station was always Hawaii. And so we always knew that, we always thought eventually they'd go back there. What's interesting is that when we got into 2012, 2013, 2014, we had this discussion and, where should we put them? Well, it's kind of interesting that they finally decided to put them exactly where the Army had said in the first place. We'll put them in Hawaii. I suspect you're going to see more exercises because we do all kinds of exercises with our allies across the Pacific Rim. But I think for the most part, they'll do pretty much the same thing that the 406th and the 407th and the 404th have done, which is, I got a unit here, I have to make sure they're ready to go. And I will make sure they have the maintenance they need, and I'll support them with new equipment fielding, and then I'll help push them out the door to wherever they happen to go for training or for another contingency. And then when they come back, I'll put them back together again.
With the unit's motto of readiness, power, forward, the 402nd AFSB will now begin a new chapter in its rich history. For the Army Sustainment Command Public Affairs Office at Rock Island Arsenal, I'm Jon Micheal Connor.